Hello, Oscillator Sync here. When I'm making ambient music, and especially ambient music which is centered around drones, which is my favorite kind of ambient music, I'm always thinking about how I can juxtapose ideas of stillness with movement. The form of kind of drone calls for stillness, but any sound that's genuinely static is kind of uninteresting to listen to. So one approach I often think about is to take something which is compositionally still, or at least moving very, very slowly, long drawn out notes or chords, and then create movement within that stillness by altering things timbrally. Earlier last year, Hologram very kindly sent across a Chroma Console for me to take a look at, and in the past few months I've been using it and learning it. And it's occurred to me that it's actually a really great answer to that particular question of how you can superimpose movement and stillness. In fact, it's got a couple of features which make it sort of almost uniquely good at that in terms of most effects pedals that are available. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at the Chroma Console through that lens. Before we get started, just in the interest of transparency, as I just mentioned, Hologram sent the Chroma Console over to me to take a look at and have allowed me to keep it. They are not having any input or editorial oversight over this video, and no other payment has occurred, but I do get to keep the pedal, so I will be calling this a sponsored video. So apply whichever pinch of salt you feel that you are required to do for that. Hopefully the sounds will speak for themselves. So this isn't going to be like a full in-depth demo of every single feature on the Chroma Console. I'm somewhat late to the party and there are lots of other videos out there already, but just briefly before we get into the sounds, it's a multi-effects unit with 4 different modules, and those modules can be used together, they can be used separately. The first module is all to do with sort of saturation, generally speaking. The second one called Movement, which is to do with modulation effects. The third one here, Diffusion, is sort of your reverbs, delays, and some sort of very hologram takes on those things. And then the fourth one, Texture, is mostly sort of lo-fi-ifiers. Lo-fi-ifiers, that's what I mean. And actually a lot of the real secret weapons sort of stuff is living in here. But let's dive into some sounds. There's a wet, dry mix control here. I'm just going to keep things on fully wet, I think, most of the time, just so we can really hear what it's doing, but you don't have to. So it's turned up, it's enabled, and we'll just get a drone happening on the lyre right here. There we go. Okay, let's introduce some character. So I'll enable this. So as I mentioned previously, this is mostly to do with sort of saturation. And when it comes to thinking about getting movement into still things, we really should not overlook the power of saturation and clipping. Because what it's really great at, as we turn up the gain here, can you hear how the sound starts to vibrate? Saturation is really, really great at finding the differences between notes, the movement that is induced by the way that 2 frequencies interact with one another, and emphasizing it to almost create a rhythm. If I bring in 2 other voices here, it almost sounds like a rhythmic tremolo. There's an intrinsic movement to these notes, and saturation will bring it out. There are a few different modes here, obviously. This first one is sort of a straight drive, We then have sweeten, which is more of a gentle saturation, sort of enhancer type thing. This is really good on drum machines, the sweeten mode. The next one, fuzz, much harsher, almost like a pinging. There's rhythm in the notes. And it's inducing almost an entirely new notes and overtone as well. Very cool. Howl is much more resonant. It's still quite fuzzy. And then swell here is like an auto swelling type thing. Not going to do much to a drone. I think I'm just going to stick with drive. We've also got a sort of an EQ control. Here it's a tilt control, so to the left it's going to emphasize the low end and drop the high end. Middle fairly neutral, and then drop out the low end and emphasize the top end up there. I think you can also set this just to be like a straight up low pass or high pass filter, which is a nice extra option. Let's just drop to 2 notes again for a minute. So let's enable the movement as well. So the first thing we have on the movement is like a doubler, and the rate kind of changes the distance between them. So there's not a lot of movement induced on its own. We might be able to move this. We'll get to that. Although we've only got 2 controls and actually only 1 control here for the texture, there is actually a way to get to a second set of controls by pressing the first 2 buttons together. The bottom knob tends to just be the effect volume, but on the modulation, the movement and the diffusion modules, it introduces drift, which is kind of like a random variation generally, which does give us some sort of movement in there. Let's try some of the other modes here. So we've got vibrato here. So pitch movement. By default, if we come back into the secondary here, drift down, it's kind of fairly mono, but the drift introduces stereo variation in the vibrato, which really starts to move things around. Next one is a phaser. Love a phaser on synths. The drift makes things more chaotic, but it doesn't give it much stereo movement. None at all, actually. We have a tremolo, so amplitude modulation. Interesting, we've already got that kind of induced tremolo as well. The drift creates stereo chaos, fluttering, broken textures. Bit much on this one, but really neat. And then we have a pitch shift as well. The drift here creates like lo-fi instabilities in it. today. I think doubler with some drift might be nice. Or maybe the vibrato. I did like the vibrato. Let's go with that. Diffusion up next. So the first two modes here are delays. So the first one is like a analog delay. Then we have a tape delay. For both of these, the drift gives you like stereo instability in the repeats, which gives you a nice bit of movement left and right. Just turn that one off for a second. Yeah. Then we have space, which is a reverb. Introduce modulation in the reverb with drift. I have to say, for me, the reverb is not the best I've heard, which is a shame given the microcosm. It's functional. Collage is a very hologram sort of granularizery type effect, quite chatty. And then we have a reverse with pitch shift. I think here might go with cascade with a good bit of drift. The final mode here, texture, is kind of the secret weapon. So we have a sort of DJ filter in the first one. That's fine. We have squash, which is a compressor. Not so useful on a drone. The last three, however, we have cassette, which introduce sort of your sort of wow and flutter and destruction. Just instant movement. So just going back to dry. Really cool. It's probably my favourite thing on the Chroma Console. And then you've got sort of two more increasingly aggressive versions. The first one kind of an analog dropout kind of. Also really cool. Less of the tonal stuff that the cassette did. But I do really like that one. And then interference is more digital. Yeah, I think I'll go with cassette today though. Or maybe broken. No, cassette. On cassette. Okay. Dry. Chroma. But that's not all. So the default order of the effects is as we've gone through them. However, it doesn't have to be. So we can come into the effects setup, which I'll do in just a second by pressing these two buttons together, and redefine the order. So if we think about what I've kind of discussed here, how distortion helps to bring out the differences between different sounds, what we could do is we could go modulation into diffusion, into character, and then into texture, which I think will give us more internal movement. Let's give it a go. So we're going to go movement into diffusion, into character, into texture. Yeah, so now immediately all of the stuff that we had inside, the distortion is more obvious. We might say, okay, well, perhaps we just want to go delay into distortion and then have the vibrato into the character. Let's try that. So, delay into distortion, into modulation, into character. Perhaps we'll try the sweeten instead of the drive. Now we've got more going on. Dial that mix back now, it's a bit more intense. So again, dry, chroma. But that's not all. And this is kind of like the big thing that almost turns it into an instrument in its own right, and that's the gesture. What the gesture allows you to do is record knob movements, and they'll play back. And they're all desynchronized with each other, which is very exciting. So, for example, if we start recording gesture by pressing these last two together, and perhaps we can move our EQ, bright a second time, dark, bright. And now it will start playing back that knob movement. And then we could record a knob movement for the saturation amount. perhaps we can record a knob movement for the delay time. Now I've got this set to tempo sync, so it will kind of snap to octaves naturally. And then we can automate the sort of amount and feedback of the delay as well. And perhaps we'll we'll do the rate. And it just kind of plays itself. So again, dry. I think that's rather nice. Why don't we bring in its own delay as well? Bit of internal distortion too. Anyway, I'm just going to sit and play with this for a bit. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I demonstrate some of the strengths of the Chroma Console. It's quite different to the microcosm. If you did enjoy the video, then as always, a like on the video is really appreciated. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye.